Angel Knot, Angel Knot.
Let's go ahead and get started. This video is Big Companies Hate Retro Gaming.
Hello fellow travelers and welcome to the Hard Light Network. So for those of you who have followed my channel for any period of time, you know that it's no secret that the industry hates retro games. Not only do these companies eventually stop seeing royalty payments from physical copies of these games, but larger companies like Nintendo have outright stated that retro gaming actually hurts innovation, somehow. Over the last few months, we've covered
Retro gaming hurts innovation. Well, that's definitely not true because there have definitely been developers who have referenced old games inspiring their new games. Hence, Concerned Ape and Stardew Valley, right? Let me check that out. Hold on. Concern. Yeah. What am I looking up? I don't have to look that up. We know that's true, right? There's been other stories about that as well, like Undertale. I believe that was like inspired by Earthbound and stuff. I could be wrong about that, but
multiple instances of classic
Nintendo's just greedy, man. Like, I hate Nintendo. I love Nintendo and I hate Nintendo at the same time.
titles being delisted, as well as legal action aimed directly at targeting games preservation. During this time, massive companies have gone completely mask off as they have utterly disregarded the effects their actions could have on their customer base moving forward. But there's one not so subtle reason for why companies are behaving this way, and I'm sure that it's not going to surprise anyone here. The struggle for games preservation has gotten pretty bleak, and honestly, it feels like we're at a tipping point. If we don't do something now, we're probably going to lose dozens, if not hundreds, of classic titles to the sands of time. As gamers, if we care...
They say that, I think, what was it? I think 80 or 85% of all gaming history has already been lost to time. You know, if it wasn't for emulation, of course.
About the culture and the community that we've built up around these titles over the last 40 years, it's time for us to make a stand and refuse to allow these corporations to mask their greed with a thin layer of pretense. I've got a short article for you guys today, but there's honestly a much more important message on the back end of this video. So please, before we get into it, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the content I've got coming up for you guys in the future, and also hit the comment section down below to encourage this video to grow in the algorithm and spread the message. Regardless of where you land on some of the specifics of this issue, I don't think anybody watching my videos wants to see these classic titles disappear forever. Whether you're a collector, a developer, or just an average gamer, your input goes a long way to improving this channel as well as helping us grow towards our goal of games preservation. That being said, if you wanted to go the extra mile, there is a super thanks option below, but with all of that out of the way, let's get into this article. Today's reading comes to us from Forbes and is entitled, "Publishers have finally said the quiet part out loud about retro games." And it begins as follows. In a recent move against the archiving of video game history, publishers have finally come clean on why they dislike retro games so much. Their recent legal case regarding the archiving of video games, which was helpfully collated at Games Radar, is finally over. Unfortunately, the final ruling is firmly against making gaming history available to all. This is an obviously awful and sad move culturally, but it will also affect people who will want to make games in the future. After all, imagine not being able to go to the library and read the works of Charles Dickens, E.M. Forster, or any other historical author. Without ready access to the history of literature, what could anyone hope for its future? Likewise with games, we all need access to the formative titles that have shaped the medium. They are akin to being required reading before you even step into the world of actually making games. However, the motivation behind this protectionism is profoundly disappointing. Again, it comes from the festering den of...
Why is gaming seen as such a different medium and form of entertainment than books or movies? Like, why doesn't it get the respect that it deserves in those regards? You can pretty much find any movie, any song from any time period that you want just about. But video games, we have to jump through all of these hoops just to keep the history. And the thing is that at some point, every game will become a retro game. So I don't care if it's Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, um, you know, I'm sorry, Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, or Breath of the Wild. Everything's gonna become retro. So you mean to tell me 50 years from now, people aren't going to be able to access that game to know what it was like to inspire them to create a new game?
Iniquity Games Publishing. And below you can actually see a response to the recent legal decision against games preservation from Frank Cifaldi, the founder and director of the Video Game History Foundation. And if you want to see more information on his response, as well as information about the Video Game History Foundation and the legal decision that was leveled against games preservation, you can actually check out my video, It's Over for Games Preservation. I go into a little more detail there, but this video has a slightly different focus. The article continues by stating, what with all the layoffs across the games industry to compensate for rampant budgetary overspending in publishing, the reality behind keeping retro games within a paid walled garden is about charging new money for old rope, and controlling the market to force gamers to play new games. The specific quote is that, quote, there would be a significant risk that preserved video games would be used for recreational purposes. This explains why people like Jim Ryan hate retro games. They think these older games would cannibalize sales from newer releases. We've had over a decade to prove that AAA games are not viable in a business sense. The budgets and returns are not sustainable. However, to get these massive budgets off the ground, the industry effectively eliminated mid-tier games. These mid-tier games are what kept the medium alive and allowed it to flourish, simply because there was a greater amount of functional variety to cater to people's disparate tastes. Retro games are also part of this cultural ecosystem, and they are now off-limits and gate-kept by clearly inept and greedy publishers. Today is a sad day for gaming, but in some sense, the openly brazen attitude of publishers is definitely something the gaming community won't forget in a hurry. I've said it before, and I'll certainly say it many more times, but there's nothing like good old-fashioned corporate greed, with money being funneled directly over to the corporate fat cats at publishing, while developers suffer the consequences, adding insult to injury by being laid off.
Here's the problem. You need to make good games, okay? You need to make good games. If you made good games, then you wouldn't be so worried about people loving the old games so much that they're not buying the new games. No, just make good games and people will play the old games and they'll play the new games. It's not rocket science. They're intimidated by the old games. That's what it is, because the old games are freaking classics. And all of this AAA garbage that they're just putting out right now can't compete. That's the problem.
Off during the holiday season. Yesterday's revolutionaries have become today's tyrants, so to speak, as these corporations which used to put out creative, thoughtful, and unique experiences have become bloated and lazy as they rest on their laurels and exploit the very customer base that brought up their success.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
But to tell you the absolute truth, gamers are not completely off the hook, and we're not free from blame either, as we continue to consume whatever slop they funnel down the pipeline. It's hard to pinpoint when exactly the games industry started to go to crap. Maybe it was with Horse Armor, or maybe it began with annual releases. But one thing is for certain, gamers have enabled these companies for far too long. The question that remains is, do these companies deserve to persevere despite bringing us garbage products for years just because of the quality of the products that they used to provide us back in the day? Exactly how many times can the nostalgia ticket be cashed in before it loses all value? I mean, sure, remasters and re-releases are great when they actually work, but companies like Steam have actually put out copies of games that don't even function and still manage to make money off of them. Recently, I went out of my way to purchase 2 physical copies of games that were for sale on Steam's marketplace but didn't actually function. The first was one of these mid-tier games mentioned in the article, a title that many people...
He bought the physical game and the physical game didn't even function. It's a scam. They'll sell you like half of a game, 2/3 of a game. You know, that's like, imagine going to McDonald's and they sell you 3/4 of your hamburger, you know, and like, yeah, you got to download the rest. That's what they're doing to us. It's just as ridiculous.
People didn't like, but I actually had a soft spot for. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. Sure, the story wasn't great and the multiplayer was hot garbage, but I had tons of fun blasting through hordes of zombies with unique Umbrella operatives. And maybe it was because of the game's lackluster reception that Steam was able to get away with selling broken copies of the game. But the other title, Splinter Cell Conviction, really shouldn't have had any excuse for being a broken port. It was an incredibly strong entry into the Splinter Cell franchise and was received phenomenally well when it launched, so I was genuinely surprised when the Steam port was broken beyond playability. Despite the fact that both copies of these games were completely unplayable, they sat on Steam's marketplace for years before being quietly removed. But that was just a standalone version.
The good thing about Steam, though, is they do have a great return policy. So if he had any issues with Steam, he should be able to get his money back, no problem.
Version of the game, as you can still purchase Splinter Cell Conviction through the Echelon Edition bundle on Steam Marketplace for $40. However, the port is still broken and multiplayers have been shut down by Ubisoft, making the game virtually unplayable. The Splinter Cell franchise as a whole is honestly one of the greatest examples for why games preservation matters, as the last entry to the series released over a decade and 2 console generations ago. The only attention Ubisoft has even shown the franchise as of late is in the now cancelled first-person shooter X Defiant, as a playable faction in the game was based on Splinter Cell's Echelon. Anyway, before wrapping up this video, there's one part of the article that I wanted to cover, and it comes from the comment section down below. A short back and forth between 2 commenters that I thought sums up both sides of the argument pretty well. Joe G states, "This deeply flawed decision will only encourage people to acquire and play these games illicitly. Demand does not disappear, and questionable legal decisions will only encourage normally compliant individuals to ignore the law. Companies will lose these revenues to the gray market." To which MNHG responds, "This ruling was for libraries to have access. The companies wouldn't have made anything if this passed. The demand remaining is important for the publishers. It keeps some people interested in the newer entries for those retro IPs. This ruling also allows publishers to use the law against anyone who pirates the games. If the above had passed and everyone started checking out games at the library to play at home, the publisher would have no legal recourse to prevent those lost sales from people playing free retro games at the library. If this passed, we can also argue that this new retro gaming group would be larger than the current..."
Hey, my library, you can check out video games. Can you check out video games at your library? Let me know in the comments.
"Piracy group. You would have people who pirate, people who used to pirate, and now use the library."
I know it's talking about a digital library, but I'm saying my local library, you can check out video games.
"People who never pirated and would now use the library. Not only did you lose any legal ground to defend your IP, you just enlarged the number of people not buying your current stuff. The only offset is the potential for people playing the library games is to get hooked enough on a continuing IP to buy the newer titles in that IP. This segment seems awfully small for the risk. The courts got it right. The correct solution is for publishers to choose to sell these games, but it's not something we should be able to force." A simple and cogent sentiment voiced by Joe G, as he seems to speak on behalf of many people in the gaming community, followed by a complex and long-winded reply from MNHG, who seems to be running interference for these massive companies. But to be fair to MNH, it's not like he's entirely wrong. I don't think the government should step in and force publishers to sell retro titles at any price. But there are several blind spots in his response that I want to touch on before wrapping up this
I feel like after a certain amount, excuse me, I feel like after a certain amount of years, it should be public domain. I don't know what that length of time should be, but it has to be, when that console, maybe like 2 generations of consoles, it's now in the public domain. Maybe that's not the best solution. I don't know what the solution is, I don't know what it is, but what we have now is trash. So many people just buy these games legally if they're readily accessible. I don't know what a good solution is. Y'all let me know in the comments.
Video. First and foremost, the quote from the legal response showed that the decision was meant to protect the collector's market and not the developer's IP. This is significant because developers don't actually receive any money when retro game stores sell their old products. When I purchased my physical copy of Splinter Cell Conviction, Ubisoft didn't see
Right. That's kind of what led me to begin emulating games, because I was kind of torn and didn't want to necessarily download games illegally. But I don't know why I put illegally in quotes. But there's no other way to purchase some of these games, you know? If I just buy it from someone on eBay, the developers, the publishers, the artists who made it don't get any of the money. They don't see anything, you know? Joe Schmo from Kokomo is the one who gets the dollar.
a dime from that sale. When it comes to the point about protecting these companies' IPs from piracy, I really don't believe that's the case, because who exactly are they going to sue? Certainly not individual pirates. The best you could say is that this creates a precedent for these companies to go after people who produce emulators. And I can almost guarantee that the second one of these companies sues somebody for producing hardware like a
I feel like, excuse me, I feel like it should be like Napster, right? Like when Napster first hit the scene and, you know, people were just getting a bunch of music illegally. Some of you all might not remember Napster, but some of you may. Napster was a website where you could download any song for free. Okay. You might hear some Soldier Boy tell them over and over. You might get some viruses also, but you can get whatever song you want. And then Apple came out with iTunes, and that pretty much killed the market, right? Or it killed the downloading piracy market to a certain extent. I feel like they need to have something like that for video games, right? Like some type of library where you can just go and you can just buy whatever game you need. Don't need games. Whatever game you want for a certain price, man. Make it easy for people to get these games, and you'll still get some money, man.
pseudo Game Boy or something, all of these emulators will immediately go digital. People will simply shift gears and start emulating software directly on their PC. I really don't see how it's supposed to protect them from piracy, because honestly, it won't be worth their time for them to go after individual people for emulating their software. And finally, this argument that the new group of retro gamers will be larger than the current group of pirates is honestly speculative at best and outright alarmist at worst. Just like there's no guarantee that preserving these games will create interest in subsequent products, there's no argument to state that just because these games are preserved, that will actually increase interest in the preserved copies themselves. A big part of the reason why games preservation is suffering right now is because a lot of modern gamers simply don't care about retro gaming at all. There are two simple words that sort of undo this entire IP argument anyway, and that's public domain. Why is it that books, images, music, and movies will all eventually slip into the public domain,
That's literally exactly what I said.
but games are somehow exempt from this? It's not like I'm making the argument that I should be legally allowed to rip the source code for the newest Call of Duty and distribute free versions of it, but why can't I do that for Pong, Dig Dug, Centipede, or even classics like Mario Kart? Once a game hits a shelf life of 30, 40, or even 50 years, why shouldn't we open it up to free distribution? To tell you the truth, it may be a little conspiratorial, but I'm honestly starting to feel like people who leave comments like MNHs are actually
Man, them the ops, man. Them the ops. Them is not real gamers. You feel me? They ain't no real gamer. That's the CEO of Sony. Like on Reddit.
just sweeping for corporate interests. And I honestly don't buy for 1 second that making efforts to preserve these older titles is damaging their profit margins so much that it justifies their actions here. Anyways, that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much.
All right, that was good. That was good. I really think that the solution is for hold on. Let me make this better. I really honestly think that the solution is for these developers and these companies to just make better games. If you made better games that were better than the old games, then you wouldn't worry about people downloading the old games, right?
Angel Knot. Angel Knot.